This is lecture 12 in International Human Rights. I'll call it Religion and Human Rights, Secularism and the Sacred. Often when we think of the relationship between secularism and the secular ideology comes to dominate, but there's many misunderstandings of what the secular is. There's three particular approaches to the secular. Some are more sensitive to the sacred, and some, on the other hand, either want to subordinate or deny the sacred altogether. And in a course on human rights, for those who would use secularism to negate, banish, or only see the worst of religion, they themselves are undermining the significance and role of human rights. For human rights has always had a high respect for the role of the best of what religion stands for at its noblest. But three notions of the secular, some obviously more respectful of the sacred in religion, others not so. So the first form of the secular is what we would call hard or aggressive secularism. By the 19th century, a series of significant thinkers emerged which were very critical of the sacred, of religion. They argued that at a philosophical level, the claims that religions were making could not be justified, they could not be verified in any empirical, objective manner. So, in that sense, they may be subjectively interesting, but objectively and publicly irrelevant in that sense. This was at more of a philosophical level. Some of the key thinkers in the 19th century, which were very much back of a sort of a secularist ideology. One gets, for example, in psychology, Sigmund Freud, with his notion that all religion is a projection of our undealt with inner issues onto the screen of ultimate reality, and the notions of God really just projections, either negative views or positive views of just issues within ourselves that we just have to come to grips with, either totalitarian or aggressive or gentle or kindly and merciful. But there is nothing out there. It's just, these are just projections that are built within human psyche. So in psychology, there emerges a certain secularist approach to human identity, human fulfillment, and Freud's notions of the id, the ego, the superego, and he tries to break this down from an anthropological perspective. In economics, people like Karl Marx is going to argue very clearly that that religion is an opiate and it serves a purpose. It eases human suffering at an economic level. In that sense, it does play an important positive role, but it is an opiate nonetheless, and that at a certain point in the dialectic of history, religion will be left behind, and people will move towards a classless, just society. But certainly in Marx, you get the notion of a certain secularism, and we can see obviously that played out, whether it's Marxism or not, in the Soviet Union, which became, certainly during its totalitarian years under Stalin and those who followed, very anti-religious in the treatment of religious people in Russia, or China for that matter, under Mao and others, hard or aggressive secularism. And so you get people like Marx as well. Friedrich Nietzsche, with his notion that God is dead. Now, was he meaning by that statement that God is dead, that there is no ultimate being out there, or was it just that the understanding of the West in its view of God, its time had come to die? Or was he arguing that there was nothing out there and humans had to, through their own will, decide how they were to live and how culture itself was to move forward? There was going to be no intervention or grace by some divine being coming into time. It was up to humans to make history of their own choosing, of their own willing, in their own creative ways. So another form of secularism, this time obviously from a more philosophical side as well. People like Durkheim and others are increasingly going to look at, as well as Weber, the disenchantment of the world from a sociological perspective, with the ending of religion as a prominent form of culture in that sense. So by the 19th century, there is emerging from various disciplines, psychology, philosophy, economics, sociology, and there are other disciplines as well. Science is a certain understanding of science, that secularism was the wave into the future. And so the notion of the sacred was increasingly so marginalized and vanished. That's aggressive or hard secularism, and that has played itself out at universities in terms of the relationship of the secular and the sacred, and how, for the most part, religion is not studied in a significant way anymore at universities. It can in terms of seminaries and synagogues and mosques and other places where it's held high, but the public universities, as well as public culture, in many ways, has taken a hard or an aggressive approach to the sacred, and hence the secular is held high. The soft, or what we say passive, understanding of secularism is one in which religion is not going to go away, spirituality is not going to go away. So best to recognize that, and it's futile to again attempt to banish the sacred from life, because human longing is always asking larger questions about the relationship of the finite, time, history, and eternity itself. And it's this attempt to integrate these views of life. And of course, if people then have a leaden ceiling between eternity and time, then by its very nature, they have to milk the finite for meaning. So they just go from one finite thing to another, ever milking it, hopefully to ease a restless heart. But as soon as they get what they want, then they're restless for something else, following one mirage after another. What looks real from a distance, when one gets to the mirage, there's nothing there once one indulges these appetites. But the soft, passive secularism acknowledges religion and spirituality won't go away, so it's to be privatized in that sense. So this is soft or passive secularism, and the whole issue of human rights in that sense is quite willing to support the importance and perennial nature of spiritual longings and religion contra hard or aggressive secularism. Third is in which of course we often hear today, the separation of church and state, mosque and state, temple and state, synagogue and state. These are just various versions of soft or passive secularism, is that it will continue. Now, the issue of human rights that gets raised, because why shouldn't people who are religious have the freedom, using their liberty in a civil, respectful way, to enter the public square with their religious concerns? And so the third form of secularism is what we call pluralist secularism, in which people from diverse religious backgrounds, First Nations, Jewish, Christian, Muslims, Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, Confucian, Taoist, many others, of course, is that honoring the notion of human rights and the rights of individuals, either to be purely secular, if that is their choice, to those who are integrative, more holistic, how do you bring together the sacred and the secular in a civil, respectful, meaningful way. The human rights traditions, either of the declarations or covenants and many others, hold high the rights of the individuals and communities to practice their religious commitments in a civil, respectful manner. And obviously what is always the concerns is the extremes that the two ideologies can go. Religion can move into the extreme of theocracy, which is very dangerous, in which you get some states in the world today in which you have priests or imams or others who see themselves as the genuine pipeline of how God speaks, and they are the mediums by which God speaks, and if one differs with them, there are serious consequences. The reaction often to theocracy is then secularism, by which, if that is what religion is, then best to have a separation between the secular and the sacred, or to demote or to deny the sacred. Now, the middle route, of which human rights very much holds high, is be wary of theocracy on the one hand, but be wary of the religion of secularism, because secularism is just a religion. Religion from the Latin religio, meaning we get our word ligaments from the bottom of legio, ligament. Is secularism sees itself as being the ligaments that hold society together. So in that sense, secularism just becomes a new religion itself. It's its own form of theocracy on the one hand. This is anthropocracy, so humans ruling, ignoring any notion of the ultimate or the divine. Now, human rights tries to find a middle, and this is where pluralist human rights comes along and attempts to honor the role of religion within the public square, provided, of course, such an approach does not slip into theocracy on the one hand, and where there are differences and collisions of perspective on a whole range of hot-button issues in the culture where civility is practiced, respect is practiced to the others. Remembering in the Greek word polis, we get our word polis, we get politics, we get police, but we also get polite. And so the notion of when religious or sacred enters into the secular sphere, whether it's education or politics and economics, that civility should always dominate respect, which does not mean people sacrifice important issues. It just means when they engage others who they differ with, it's done respectfully, civilly, and politely, which is quite the opposite to some of the fire hosing, rhetorical fire hosing that goes on in the name of the culture wars today. So religion and human rights, then, the three types: aggressive, hard secularism, soft, passive secularism, pluralist secularism, which is a middle road between theocracy and the religion of theocracy and the religion of secularism itself. And so this middle road, which is one in which people from religious backgrounds enter into the public square, but it is always done in a respectful and civil way, recognizing conflict is always at the heart of political religious questions. But how is that to be handled without people incriminating, turning on one another, each side claiming to be the true interpretation of their clan or tribe, and then those who don't agree with them being the heterodox, the heretics. And that's just not a religious issue. In the culture wars we face today, we see certain people positioning self as the true interpreters of the difficult issues. Those who question them are seen as heterodox or heretics, or they're simply silenced. Cancel wars, the whole woke culture. Where does this all fit in? These are important human rights questions, and in the midst of these collisions, how can things be handled in a respectful rather than a cancel culture manner?